Welcome to Crossroads, a transnational assassination network, and this is the exact phrase they're using for it, this is real, has actually been identified by the U.S. Department of Treasury, which said in a recent report that the government is now working with officials in the United Kingdom to target this network's operations. It says that this network is allegedly being run by an Iranian drug trafficker. It carries out operations under the orders of the Iranian government, and this is what's really interesting, the assassinations are carried out through this network using organized criminal networks, organized crime. U.S. Department of Treasury, this is the official report from the U.S. government on this. It says this. Today, the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control and the United Kingdom are taking joint action against a network of individuals that targeted Iranian dissidents and opposition activists for assassinations at the direction of the Iranian regime. It says that this network, led by Iranian narcotics trafficker Naji Ibrahim Sharif Zidashti, and operates at the behest of Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. And it says that Zidashti's network has carried out numerous acts of transnational repression, including assassinations and kidnappings across multiple jurisdictions in an attempt to silence the Iranian regime's perceived critics. The network has also plotted operations in the United States. And this is going to be a problem with the open border, by the way, which I'll get into. They say that today's action is being taken in conjunction with the unsealing of an indictment by the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI. The United Kingdom, the UK, is also designated Mohammed Reza Ansari, who was previously designated by, of course, the U.S. Treasury group. Now, this group and the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is part of the Iranian military, have long targeted perceived regime opponents in acts of transnational repression outside of Iran. They say it's a practice that the regime has accelerated in recent years. They say a wide range of dissidents, journalists, activists, and former Iranian officials have been targeted for assassination, kidnapping, and hacking operations across numerous countries in the Middle East, Europe, and right here in North America. It says the regime increasingly relies on these plots in an attempt to obscure links to the government of Iran and maintain plausible deniability. Now, let me explain some of this, because actually there have been cases where they've put out hits even on American officials, even on U.S. government officials. This is not limited to just, of course, Iranian dissidents and so on. Non-Iranian officials have been targeted as well. And what I find especially interesting, personally, is this last part where it says this. The Iranian regime is using organized criminal groups to carry out assassinations in many countries. In other words, these are not just assassinations in the Middle East, partly. These include assassinations, kidnappings, hacking operations also in Europe and in North America. But most importantly, they're working through gangs. They're working through mafias. In other words, as I talked before about this underground world order, so to speak, you have governments working with gangs and criminal operations to carry out their activities and making it appear that these things are being done through criminal groups, not by foreign governments. And this network of cooperation between mafias and between gang members and so on, and also what I would say are evil governments, actually says a lot about how this network actually operates. Now, let me show you something else, because this gives some deeper insights into reports that may have seemed fairly bizarre at first. There have been some very strange news reports about these assassination attempts that have happened over the years and the rumors of foreign government involvement. Let me show you one example of this. Take, for instance, what happened just January last year. An alleged Iranian group was accused of trying to assassinate a woman in New York City. This was right in New York, folks. U.S. News said this. The Department of Justice on Friday unveiled stunning details into an Iranian-backed attempt to assassinate an American journalist at her Brooklyn home last year. This is the latest, they said, and what officials warn is an alarming rise in plots orchestrated by nation-states targeting people inside the U.S. In other words, they're suggesting it's not just Iran, other countries are doing this. We know, for example, that China was caught running, of course, these secret police departments, that the Chinese Communist Party has what they call Operation Fox Hunt, where agents of the Communist Party of China are actively operating inside the United States, and they're targeting certain people, threatening their families, trying to make them kill themselves, or trying to make them willfully return to China. There are many ways they do it. Now, on the note of what happened in New York, let me show you the actual Justice Department document, just to emphasize that this is not just some fake news, rumor or something like that. This is the Justice Department website. This is the official document. It says members of Eastern European organized crime group. In other words, these are Eastern European mafia, mafia actors working hand in hand with the Iranian government. They said that they plotted to murder a U.S. citizen of Iranian origin in New York City who has publicly opposed the Iranian government. And they say U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said this, quote, "As alleged, the defendants are members of an organized crime group, a gang, right, a mafia, hired to assassinate right here in New York City a U.S. citizen of Iranian origin who has been critical of the regime's autocracy and its discard for human rights. This is the second time in the past 2 years that the office and our partners at the FBI have disrupted plots originating from within Iran to kidnap or kill this victim for the crime of exercising the right to free speech, to independent political thought, and to advocacy for the rights of the oppressed and disenfranchised inside Iran." Now, these assassinations are not limited to people of Iranian or of Persian descent either. You might remember the news that there was an assassination plot that aimed to kill 2 U.S. officials, U.S. government officials. Now, I'll be talking more about this and also another story about how big Pharma TV ads were designed not for the audience, but instead to buy off the media. Some pretty shocking stuff, folks, but I can't show you that on YouTube. So all of that is going to be after we jump into our sponsor. Now, people on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, don't worry. Today is Thursday, and the whole episode is going to be available, so stick around. So I'm going to talk about it, even though YouTube might not like it. We'll be back shortly. I'll see you soon.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. We've been talking about this global assassination network, and you might remember that the United States sanctioned Iran last year, and why? It's because they had an alleged plot to assassinate former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, that plot allegedly included other targets for assassination in other parts of the world, including another U.S. government official. Let me show you just the actual Justice Department document from August of 2022, and this is what it said. An Iranian national and member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps was charged by complaint, unsealed today in the District Court of Columbia, right, with use of interstate commerce facilities in the commission of a murder for hire and with providing and attempting to provide material support for a transnational murder plot. According to court documents beginning in October 2021, Saram Porafi, aka Medhi Rezai, 45, of Tehran, Iran, attempted to arrange the murder of former National Security Advisor John Bolton, likely in retaliation of the January 2020 death of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani. And it notes that this individual, working on behalf of the Iranian military, attempted to pay individuals in the United States $300,000 to carry out the murder in Washington, D.C. or Maryland. $300,000, folks, to kill a top-level U.S. official. And these Iranian assassination operations are also not just limited to Iranian assassinations. You might remember the very bizarre story from October of 2011, where it said that Iran had tried hiring members of the Mexican drug cartel to assassinate a Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. And the Iranians tried to get the Mexican cartels, which notably are now heavily operating in the United States, they wanted them to kill this individual and then bomb a restaurant in Washington. In other words, using this assassination network to also carry out a terrorist attack. The Daily Mail said this way back in October of 2011. It said House Speaker John Boehner today called on Obama to hold Iran's feet to the fire in the wake of the thwarting of a significant terrorist attack by agents working for the Iranian government to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in America in Washington, D.C. And of course, what did Obama do? Obama did nothing. Iran was capturing American troops. Iran, was of course threatening the United States. Iran was making fools of us. Obama gave them literally pallets of cash, which was later revealed and which was initially denied. And Iran, meanwhile, was trying to kill officials right here in the United States, and was also working with the Mexican cartels to do it. Now it says this further, it's trying to at least. It says that this individual, a 56-year-old U.S. citizen who also holds an Iranian passport, appeared in court in New York last night accused of trying to hire a Mexican drug cartel to carry out the killing. And it said that he was accused and plotting to kill Adel al-Jubeir by bombing a restaurant before setting off blasts at the Saudi and Israeli embassies. It says the devastating plan was foiled after this individual offered a government informant posing as a Mexican drug cartel associate a $1.5 million bounty to help carry out this attack. And folks, consider the relatively small amount of money that a foreign, very evil government can use to launch attacks like this in the United States. The only reason that one worked out was because the individual did not actually contact a Mexican cartel member. He was contacting a U.S. government agent posing as one, and so the plot was able to be foiled. But back to the recent actions by the United States and the United Kingdom to now target this entire assassination network. This is giving a very rare glimpse into the global system behind assassinations, which do take place, by the way. And it reveals how Iran, at least, uses criminal organizations as its proxies to carry out assassinations and kidnappings. This is important, folks, because the way assassinations work is through plausible deniability. When a lot of us think of foreign government assassinations, we think of James Bond with a silencer, or suppressor, putting it on his gun with his gloves, in a hotel room, something like that. That's not how they work. It looks like a gang member trying to rob somebody and then killing them by accident. It looks like somebody crashing into a dump truck. It looks like an accident, or it looks like, for example, a gang member just, robbing somebody and killing them. That's what real assassinations look like. They don't look like James Bond or Mission Impossible. And, of course, first world nations, if they carry out assassinations, typically they want to have plausible deniability where there are witnesses and it appears to be of a natural death, as I've been told by some former officials. And keep in mind that this, in particular, is becoming a real threat because with Iran running a transnational assassination network, working hand in hand with, for example, gang members or criminals or actual mafias or Mexican drug cartel members, remember that Iran heavily runs Hezbollah, And Hezbollah has deep ties throughout Latin America, including with the Mexican cartels. They have broad operations throughout Latin America, including actual political parties in some countries in Latin America. And if we go to war with Hezbollah, and if we go to war with the Houthis, and if we go to war with maybe Iran, at least by proxy, which we're already to an extent doing, that means that this network operating throughout Latin America and now through the open borders right here into the United States can carry out operations like this. We talk about fifth column threats, undercover operators living normal lives here in the U.S. who could be called upon to carry out, for example, run-and-gun operations, terrorist attacks, or yes, assassinations. And this is now being exposed to an extent. And folks, remember also, operations along these lines are not limited to Iran. We talked briefly about the Chinese Communist Party's secret police stations. There are several, of course, many of them operating around the world, several found right here in the United States, including one that was shut down in New York. I think 2 shut down in New York, actually. And remember as well that that's just one of many operations of that nature. Not even just including all the countries in the world, but even the Chinese Communist Party. Aside from the secret police networks, they also have the, of course, Operation Fox Hunt and the United Front Work Department, which runs similar things. And that's just one government. Now, another big thing happened recently. Tucker Carlson recently spoke with a whistleblower, Kaylee Means, an insider with Big Pharma, everyone's favorite big business that advertises everywhere. And he claimed something very, very interesting. He claimed that the advertisements from pharmaceutical companies on TV news networks, he is saying these are not to actually advertise to the audience. More so, right, rather than advertise to the audiences, they're meant to act as ways of buying off the news outlets. Watch this.
This is an open secret. The kind of silly ads you see between the news breaks, the points of that is not, it's marginally to impact the customer. But the pharma's already got that. They've already bought off the doctors. They're good on that. No, this is an open secret. The news ad spending from pharma is a public relation lobbying tactic, essentially to buy off the news. The news is they're not investigating pharma.
I've noticed.
The news has become basically a referee that you are a terrible anti-science Luddite for asking why, the shots that we require our kids to get that fundamentally by their own advertising change the immune system of that child for life, why it's gone from 20 to 70. To even ask that question, the news referees that and calls you anti-science when the 2 largest vaccine makers in the country are literally criminal enterprises. GlaxoSmithKline and Merck, in the past 5 years, has settled 2 of the largest criminal penalties in American corporate history for bribing doctors and creating misleading research.
Well, those are pretty serious accusations, and especially given the expansive control we've seen get handed over to the pharmaceutical industrial complex, where they can force you to get an injection and there's nothing you can say about it. They made it so this network can force you to get vaccinated or you lose your job. They made it so this network can force you to vaccinate your children or your children can't go to school or maybe you will be punished for it. And it turns out that this system is not just some benign, pharmaceutical company looking out for the good of the American people. This is a system of cooperation, and I would even say corruption, in my opinion, between big government, news outlets, pharmaceutical companies, and even international organizations like the World Health Organization. And it's true that money plays a role in all of these things at every single level. Politicians get lobbying money. They get, of course, money for their campaigns. Media, news outlets, they get advertising money. Doctors get individual kickbacks on a personal level. Medical researchers get their paychecks, and medical journals won't even publish their papers if they don't follow the key narratives on medications and so on. And everyone, all of them, the entire network, is able to profit on the stock market as they push for things like, let's say, vaccine mandates, which will inflate the value of the companies on the market and make everybody who just plays the game stinking rich. And this isn't even to mention things like, for example, online censorship that threaten to demonetize or deplatform independent journalists who even cover, alternative news, questioning the efficacy of the types of things that they're trying to push. Now, let me show you The Guardian back in 2017. The Guardian said this: pharmaceutical companies spend far more than any other industry to influence politicians. And folks, you read that right. Influence politicians. I'd call that bribery personally, but maybe it's a little different here. They say drug makers have poured close to $2.5 billion into lobbying and funding members of Congress over the past decade. Keep in mind, this is slightly outdated, but it's hard to find the new numbers. They say this: hundreds of thousands of dollars have gone to Mitch McConnell, although he is hardly alone. 9 out of 10 members of the House of Representatives and all but 3 of the U.S.'s 100 senators have taken campaign contributions from pharmaceutical companies seeking to affect legislation on everything from the cost of drugs to how new medicines are approved. Now, it's been a problem for a while, actually. This is not something new, technically, right? Here's some data on money and on the money drug companies gave to politicians in the United States, going from the years 1999 all the way up to 2018. And again, it's hard to find some of the recent numbers because a lot of media just don't report it, frankly. This is a study, and this is an official paper, on the National Institute of Health website from JAMA Internal Medicine. It says this. It says, this observational study, which analyzed publicly available data on campaign contributions and lobbying in the U.S. from 1999 to 2018, found that the pharmaceutical and health product industry spent $4.7 billion, an average of $233 million per year, on lobbying. This is just lobbying, folks. The U.S. federal government, $414 million on contributions to presidential and congressional electoral candidates, bankrolling their campaigns, national party committees and outside spending groups, and $877 million in contributions to state candidates and committees. Contributions were targeted at senior legislators in Congress involved in drafting healthcare laws. Funny, you wonder why they're doing it, right? And state committees that opposed or supported key referenda on drug pricing and regulation. Now, in 2021, the Washington Post was reporting that the pharmaceutical industry was putting its lobbying operations into overdrive. And why was that? Well, we don't really know, but keep in mind that this was when things like, for example, vaccine mandates were still going very strong. And I would personally wonder, were they, for example, pumping more money in because they wanted to push the mandates? Maybe. Washington Post said pharmaceutical industry likely to shatter its lobbying record as it works to shape Democrats' spending bill. A years-long battle over prescription drug prices reaches its apex as the industry spends tens of millions to alter the plan. Now, look, what's shocking to me is it's illegal to bribe a government official. You can't bribe an official to try to make them change their policy. You can't slip them an envelope of money and say, hey, buddy, vote yes tomorrow. Vote yes tomorrow, right? You can't do that. They might throw you in prison for it. But there are legal ways to do it, where you can openly say you're going to spend tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars with the intent of influencing the votes they're going to cast, but you call it lobbying. You get that? That's the loophole, folks. But look, back to what Tucker Carlson was discussing, because we started this by talking about what he was saying in his recent episode, where they were talking about how the pharmaceutical industry is pouring money into news outlets, not with the intent of advertising these drugs to the viewers of these news outlets, but instead to make sure they have the news outlets in their pockets. And if that's the thinking, according to this individual at least, of why these pharmaceutical companies do that, you have to wonder, is that the same goal they have with giving money to politicians? Is the purpose not to, for example, advertise or get money out there or say, hey, remember us, but instead to get them in their pocket? If that is the case, and that's something much more serious. Now, as of 2023, Big Pharma rose to become the second largest spender on digital advertisement. They're now the largest backer of most news outlets. Fierce Pharma says, Pharma has overtaken tech to become the second largest industry for ad spending in 2023. This is one of a wealth of insights from the latest book of data from SMI, which found pharma is dialing up spending on establishment mediums such as linear TV while simultaneously expanding quickly into digital video and podcasts. And notably, they don't actually tell us how much money is being spent. Now, this is not just the media. It's actually not even just politicians. Money from Big Pharma is also a problem with doctors. Your doctor getting kickbacks, in other words, if they prescribe a drug to you. Ars Technica said, of the nearly $30 billion that health companies now spend on medical marketing each year, around 68%, or about $20 billion, goes to persuading doctors and other medical professionals, not consumers, of the benefits of prescription drugs. They're salespeople, folks. This is a business and they're selling products. And the customers are you, and the medium for that, the people pushing the product, are the doctors, acting at their behest and getting kickbacks for doing it. They say this further in. That's according to an in-depth analysis published in JAMA this week. The study broke down exactly how health companies convinced us to spend enormous sums of our care between 1997 and 2016. In that time, health companies went from spending $17.7 billion to $29.9 billion on medical marketing. Meanwhile, U.S. healthcare spending hit $3.3 trillion, or 17.8% of the GDP in 2016. Folks, this is like a good chunk of our entire economy, in other words. And think about all of this, by the way, in the context of how the next few years things are going to roll out. More than 600 rural hospitals, which is nearly 30% of rural hospitals nationwide, are in financial distress and at risk of closing down. They're going out of business. The dire issue is covered, by the way, in the documentary we published called Flatline, which you can see on Epoch TV. So if you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out. But let's go into some questions, folks, because this is all some pretty crazy stuff, and let's talk about it. Let's see. First question here from Embattled Farmer. You're saying, Josh, doesn't this sound like an episode out of a Hollywood show like The Blacklist? Yeah, actually my grandpa was a big fan of that. I watched the first season, by the way. Yeah, so The Blacklist is this series of this former kind of shadowy criminal guy who has all these networks of spy organizations, and he's giving a blacklist of how of all the criminals tied in with this network and so on, right? It is very similar to that in some ways. I don't know about all the dramatization. Although I should note some of the cases in that are based on some real world things. For example, the cartels like dissolving their victims in acid and things like that. They had one guy, for example, with the Mexican cartels called the Soup Maker. And his specialty was, of course, to dispose of bodies killed through the network by dissolving them in acid. There are things like this. This actually does happen. Including, for example, I've heard of court cases where Mexican cartel members are being charged in the United States and the witnesses begin disappearing. This, without a doubt, does happen, or at least there are deep suspicions of it. And the other side you have, of course, even among gang members, that if, for example, a gang member is wanting to come out and make things public, if they want to reveal how the cartels are operating, a mark will be on their head, a hit will be on them. And yes, that is considered an assassination. If the cartels kill somebody on U.S. soil because they believe they might rat on the cartels, or, for example, a network connected to them, and they kill them because of that, that's an assassination. The concern, though, is that if a government agent or, let's say, somebody else wants to, or a terrorist network wants to wipe their hands clean of something, they need a job done. Maybe there's a key witness about to testify about an issue they don't want the public to know about. Maybe and by the way, interesting thing with testifying before Congress, you have to be interviewed by the lawyers of both the Republicans and the Democrats, and if they don't like what you're going to say, they don't let you speak, by the way. But if you have these individuals who are going to reveal something, who are going to criticize a regime, who are making a stink about maybe a certain island where children are being sex trafficked, hypothetically speaking, right? Like Lolita Island, right? I'll just say it. Little St. John's. And they suddenly just die. They feel that life is too much. They say publicly, I'm not suicidal, I'm not going to kill myself, and they just find it's too much, and they hang themselves off their bedside or off a doorknob, or they just shoot themselves in the chest with a shotgun, throw the shotgun 30 feet, and then hang themselves, like happened to one of these individuals, by the way, and I'm not exaggerating, or just decide that they need to shoot themselves twice in the back of the head without a gun. These individuals, may have been assassinated, and maybe they're not suicides. I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, right? Of course. Without a doubt, these things happen, and there are a lot of suspicions that they're happening for a lot of these reasons. Government corruption, international terrorism, global crime networks, all of these things use networks that operate through methods of concealing the origins of these hits, of the orders. And it's actually not a lot of money either, which is even kind of more shocking, In my opinion, the real crazy thing is it's relatively not that expensive. You think of the value of someone's life, right? Anyways, B.S.H.A. Milton, 1987 or 78. You're saying, ever notice how all the media focus on the same thing, like the border after 3 years? Everyone cares now. It's called PSYOP. Yeah, actually, there's the Global Media Initiative. If you want to learn more about this, I did an interview just recently with Dr. Robert Malone, and he has a new show on Epoch TV called Flatline, and I believe his first episode is about this. There's an actual established organization that most of the mainstream media are part of, and it coordinates their coverage. This is real. You can look it up. I recommend, if you want to learn more about this, watch the first episode of Flatline, which just premiered recently. Fallout. I'm sorry, not Flatline. Flatline's another documentary. It's a documentary a new show we have called Fallout. It's with Dr. Robert Malone. And he, in the first episode, explains this. You can also watch my interview with him, which is also on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com, where we explain this and we delve into it. But what there is this is real. It's an actual organization. Most of the mainstream media are part of it, and it coordinates their coverage between each other. If a network covers a story outside of the agreed upon stories and narratives, the agreement is that all the other media cannot cover that story or cannot cover their coverage of it. Which I should note, by the way, is also one of the reasons why you don't see me following the pack. You'll notice that on Crossroads, I'll talk about what I think is most important. I don't follow, I'll tell you the big stories, right? If something big happens, I'll tell you about it. But I judge this independently. I'm not going to follow the pack. And you'll often see me covering stories that are radically different from what other media deem as important, which is why we talk about global transnational assassin networks, and we talk about, for example, government bribery operations and things of that sort. Things that I think everybody should be covering, but most of them don't really cover that well. Without a doubt, I would call it maybe a PSYOP, but without a doubt, it is part of an operation to coordinate news coverage, and I think that they do it in a way to make sure that certain stories are not covered. And they do go after people who don't toe the line. You'll notice how often I've been attacked and censored, by the way. Ryan Payne, you're saying, Treasury, the Department of Treasury, discovers global assassination network ran by Iran via organized crime networks after finances released to Iran by U.S. Weird? Yeah, good point. Whose assassinations network is this? That is concealed by various degrees of separation through U.S.'s enemies. There's a couple layers to this. One, sometimes, well, yes, for example, the Biden administration unfroze billions of dollars for Iran to use. Technically, they could argue that there are limits on how the money they unfroze could be spent. But if the U.S. unfreezes money for Iran to spend, Iran, for basic services, Iran can use its existing budget to pay for those and use that new several billion dollars of space to carry out things like, $300,000 for an assassination. And if you have a few billion dollars, that's a lot of assassinations. They can use it to go and finance global terror networks like the Houthis, which they already are. They can carry out terrorist attacks on foreign soil. They can operate global networks running these things. Because as many people might be surprised to learn, terrorists are not purely ideological. A lot of them are doing it because they need money. There's a deep financial interest in this. Interestingly, by the way, the U.S. government should know this. They should understand this. Because the Israelis, of course, fighting a lot of proxy wars against Iran, actually found that the most effective way they found to take down terrorist networks is to go after the finances. They had an operation a long time ago called maybe not that long. It was called Operation Harpoon. There was even a book written on it. I actually, years ago, before I had Crossroads, I was just a writing journalist, right? I did a story on it and I interviewed some of the people involved. It's called Operation Harpoon. And what they did was they went after the money, for example, that was used to pay off the families of suicide bombers, that was used to pay for terrorist attacks, and they were taking out the finances in transit. And so understand that this is known. This is known by Israel as being the most effective way of taking down a terrorist network. This is understood by anybody in the U.S. who has followed national security and understands the history of terrorist networks and the most effective way to take them down. So if you're a government official and you understand that money is needed to carry out terrorist attacks, and that is the most sensitive area for them, it's more effective than bombs, it's more effective than assassinations, it's more effective than anything. If you want to stop terrorism, cut off the finances. And they understand that, and then they unfreeze billions of dollars for what they know is the largest supporter of transnational terrorism. You have to wonder if they understand what they're doing. And lo and behold, right, case in point, Biden frees up billions for Iran, global terrorism magically starts up again. Oh, what a surprise. It's almost like, how did they not know, right? At the same time, too, though, you have a lot of individual officials who have been corrupted. This is actually a huge problem globally. You have a lot of government officials who have, to some extent, been bought off either by gangs, cartels, foreign governments, or through mafias. They take money from them and so on. Or through lobbyists, individuals who have been bought off, or through even think tank members and other individuals. The network of corruption is one of the key factors that exists within transnational organized crime, including within drug trafficking. And it's one of the reasons why foreign governments like the Chinese Communist Party and Iran use the underground networks, criminal organizations, and so on as ways, as mediums to carry out attacks. This is one of the reasons, for example, why the Chinese Communist Party's United Front, which I've spent well over a decade researching. My research on that began in 2008 when I accidentally uncovered the network in New York and wrote some of the first articles on it in English. This network run by the Chinese Communist Party, the United Front Work Department, operates through Chinese consulates and embassies. These then do what they call liaison work to Chinese fraternal organizations known as tongs. These are guilds, they're unions, they're hometown associations, they're student organizations. They're the oil workers' tong, or the police workers' tong, Chinese Police Association. They're hometown associations like the Fujian, Benevolent Association. The issue then is, within a lot of the tongs operate the Chinese gangs. The Chinese gangs, between the operations of the tongs and the gangs on the streets, the tongs do like outreach and legitimate operations. The gangs do illegitimate operations, gambling operations, money laundering operations, criminal operations, everything else, right? Drugs, human trafficking, you name it. In fact, the Fujian gang in New York is one of the largest human traffickers on earth. They're one of the largest transnational organized crime groups, and they operate relatively openly. The organization they're under, being the Fujian Benevolent Association, or at least used to, is one of the main organizations tied in with the Chinese Communist Party in New York, by the way. Now, this network, what happens is when the Chinese Communist Party reaches to them, they gain access not just to the surface level members who can work as insiders or spies or agents of influence within high level government, within inviting officials back to China, within stealing technology, within breaching or hacking networks if they get asked to through this network. But it also gives them access to the gangs. And this loop forms what is called the triads, the Chinese mafia. And once they gain access to the gangs, they gain access to human trafficking channels, meaning they can bring whoever they want into the country. They gain access to the drug trafficking networks, meaning they can control and operate those and profit from them. And most importantly, they gain access to the smuggling channels and access to every single government official, police officer, local city council member, business member, whatever, who has been corrupted, who has agreed to engage in criminal activity or accept bribes from that network. And then understand the way that transnational crime works. The Chinese mafia will work hand in hand with the cartels. For example, human trafficking. Let's use one real example, right? The Chinese human traffickers are called snakeheads. They will bring people from China, oftentimes not directly into the United States, but instead to Mexican ports. Because, of course, it's easier to just drop them off in Mexico than the U.S., right? It'll look a bit awkward if a bunch of Chinese, raid the beaches of California, which the Mexicans do, but for the most part, the Chinese don't, right? They'll bring them either Canada, sometimes Canada, or to Mexico. They drop them off, and then there's a handoff with human traffickers. The snakeheads, the Chinese human traffickers, will then work with the coyotes, the Mexican human traffickers. And the Mexican human traffickers will then take over the operations through a business agreement between the two. Meaning if you gain control of the Chinese human trafficking networks, mainly run out of Fujian province in China, it means that you've also gained connections to the official cartel and human trafficker liaisons in Mexico. And through those programs, you can then gain access to their networks of corruption. And then if you understand the way that, for example, narco-terrorism works, for example, the fact that a lot of the drug trade is deeply tied in with terrorist groups that finance their operations through drugs. Understand, for example, what happens with organizations like Shining Path, like the many Maoist organizations that were trained in communist China and now run guerrilla operations, drug trafficking operations, and everything like that. If you understand their networks all throughout Latin America, including corrupting governments, including corrupting business leaders, including corrupting police, those individuals, every single person contained within that network, can be utilized for different forms of corruption, for different forms of liaison, for different forms of altering policies and everything else. Because once the Communist Party of China or another evil regime gains access to people willing to accept bribes, willing to turn a blind eye, willing to allow people to commit crimes, they then can do whatever they want. That is how the underground world order works. And just like the surface world order, you're talking, this is technically multi-trillion-dollar global economy, right? There are entire countries that their entire income comes almost fully from it. Just like the U.S. and a lot of Western countries might have, very wealthy sources within the surface world economy, the tech industry, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, maybe they're gray area, right? There are also underworld economies that generate a lot of money, a whole lot of money, and it can be used for a lot of purposes. Let's see here. James Dyson, you're saying, why is America so complacent? This is the unfortunate thing we have. We all believe it could never happen here, is why. This is something important to understand. Latin America is not significantly culturally different from the United States. And this may be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. Latin America was colonized before the United States, mainly by the same groups that colonized the U.S. You had British colonies, you had Portuguese colonies, you had French colonies, you had Spanish colonies. And they were operating in Latin America and actually in Canada before the United States was settled. They tried setting up colonies, for example, in Florida. First it was the French, the Spanish literally killed all of them. And then the Spanish took over and the French literally killed all of them in retaliation. The attempts to colonize the United States largely failed because the Indian tribes here were more dangerous. It was very rough settling the United States. The Pilgrims, of course, managed to, ironically using peaceful means. Whereas the Spaniards, they were under, technically what the Spaniards were doing with the Spanish conquistadors and stuff, who of course settled Mexico very early on, and of course some of the Caribbean islands, they were under orders from the Vatican, and it was actually a crusade. They were on orders to humanize and Christianize the Americas. It was a crusade, technically. And for them, it was a war. They conquered the countries, then they enslaved the populations, and then they created their own system, right? They moved the Spanish system, the Portuguese system, whatever else, into Latin America. They were significantly more brutal. Those methods didn't work so well in the United States. You can guess why, but it wasn't until later that the U.S. was actually settled. But what has happened is that the culture within most of Latin America is not like some random Indian culture. It's European culture. It's European culture. The main cultural difference we have between them, the settlers there and the settlers here, France mostly controlled Canada until towards the end, right? Britain, of course, later took over Canada from the French. A lot of the Indian tribes were working under various European governments. The French controlled many tribes, the British controlled many tribes, and so on. And the Spaniards as well controlled many tribes. Spain controlled most of, the Mexico and the western states. The United States was mainly under Britain, the United Kingdom later on, right? Now, these are all European countries. And for several hundred years, going back to like the late 1400s, this is not long after literal medieval times, folks. This was in a time where you still had knights. Just putting it in context, you still had knights in shining armor, although towards the beginning of the gun age. It was during that time in the world. This was a long time ago. And these European cultures establishing their colonies, of course, had their culture as well. The main difference you have in Latin America culturally, because in terms of race, they're mostly the same racial mix as the United States. The difference being they brought in more black slaves. More than 90% of slavery went to Latin America, not to the United States. Most of the black slaves are there. The Spaniards and being Spaniards, right? Spain Spaniards were much more seductive than the British were, apparently. And so they interbred a lot more with the natives. And so people there are more mixed race. But without a doubt, you have most of the same race mixings. It's people who are mixed race of European, native Indian in the various countries, and also, Black African. The same racial mixes you'll find in the United States. In other words, the racial background, the cultural background between America and Latin America is not significantly different. It is not significantly different. The main cultural difference we have is that America was mainly Protestant, whereas Latin America was mainly Catholic, because the conquistadors in other countries forced people to adopt the religion, right? Culturally, that's the only main difference. And understand then that the only difference we have then, aside from religion, is the fact that these countries were settled much earlier. They are earlier civilizations than America is, than the United States is. And the methods of subverting them, the methods of making them socialist, the methods of conquering these countries through woke programs and everything else, and of corrupting them, of bringing in foreign corruption, the methods used there can and do work in the United States, even though we think that we're immune to it. We are not. And the methods that were used by communist organizations to subvert, control, and corrupt Latin America are now being done in the United States. We are not immune to it. The things we've watched there, the banana republics, the gang-controlled countries, the mafia governments, that is something being imported into the United States. And it worked there, and it will probably work here if we allow it to continue. And personally, I'd say for a lot of the globalists and people engaged in those types of criminal things, they understand this, which is personally why I think if you look at the methods they use to subvert Latin America and you look at what they're doing here, it's mostly the same thing. They're replicating the same models. Ashley from California, you're saying, why do we need commercials for pills? It used to be illegal, by the way. There used to be laws against advertising of drugs to consumers. Personally, I am very much against the pharmaceutical industry. I do not believe in most modern medicine, personally. I'm not saying I don't believe if I break a bone, I'm not going to go get a doctor to put a cast on it. You know, I'm not crazy. Don't get me wrong. Like I think I'm within reason, right? If I get very ill, I'm still going to get normal medical treatment. Don't get me wrong, right? But I believe that a lot of the drugs they give you are not meant to actually cure you. And especially when you get into the realm of a lot of the drugs that frankly just have wild side effects, and they prescribe things for just about every condition you can imagine, to the extent where they have to give you drugs for the thing you're facing, and then drugs for the side effects, and then drugs for the side effects of the side effects. In my opinion, it's an industry, it's a business, right? And on that note too, if you understand traditional medicine, I'm personally a big fan of traditional Chinese medicine. I like it. I think it works fantastic. But my personal opinion, I'm not giving medical advice here, but if you understand the way they viewed it, they would often look at imbalances and correcting the imbalances. And after it's corrected, you don't continue the treatment. What a lot of the Western stuff does is artificially corrects the surface symptoms and then maintains that indefinitely. You're stuck on the pills the rest of your dang life. And if your body becomes, dependent on it, which does happen, by the way, then you're facing other problems. Actually, one of my best friends died from that when I was fairly young, actually. I had a friend who was in a car accident, severely injured, barely survived. His parents spent millions, actually, on hospital bills. Go to the hospitals, right? After, of course, that, he was put on painkillers. He became addicted to the painkillers. He went out and drank alcohol one night, and the mix killed him. And so, we didn't know he was facing that, but that stuff's real. That happens, folks. And you get people who get addicted sometimes to the drugs given during, short periods of time, and they can't get off them. It's a broken system, in my opinion. And of course, that's just about the painkillers and stuff. But you get into the medications themselves, and just you're taking stuff for the rest of your life, and you're never really curing. That means, in my opinion, you're never really curing it. That's where I have issues. I don't have an issue with short-term treatment. I don't have an issue if you get sick or your kid gets a cold and you take them to the doctor. If you get a tumor or whatever else, go, right? Fine. But I also believe that because of the way the industry is set up, that a lot of the frontline treatments are not available to you. I have family through my wife in, for example, France, who are cancer researchers. They'll tell you that they have stuff that works, but they can't get the approval for it. You hear this a lot. And, it's that kind of stuff I have issue with. The industry, let me say it a different way. There's a book called Dancing Naked in the Mind Field. Not mind like landmines, but mind like the human mind. It was written by a Nobel Peace Prize winner, I believe Kary Mullis. My dad had me read it when I was in junior high. And one thing he talks about is, he claims, according to this Nobel Peace Prize winner, he says that a lot of the industry will never create proper cures for many diseases because he says it's a business. He says if they cure it, the money goes away. All the research funds go away. All the medical journals that make money off that go away. All the treatment industry goes away. This multi-trillion-dollar part of our economy, right? 17% of the GDP of the United States, dependent on long-term care. A lot of that goes away. If you treat the problem, the impact on businesses, on individual wealth, on people who, frankly just make a living on an indefinite industry, all of that goes away. And so you can't treat it. You can't cure it. If you cure it, you damage the interests of the individuals tied into it. According to Kary Mullis, not myself. Nobel Peace Prize winner. Again, great book on that, Dancing Naked in the Mind Field. That is my concern with the pharmaceutical industrial complex, not to mention the elements of corruption that exist where they try to influence government policy through what I would consider to be bribery. And they try to influence news outlets through what I would consider to be bribery under the guise of legitimate payments. My personal opinion, of course. Let's see, Embattled Farmer, you're saying they're doing the same as Rockefeller did. Yes. Push meds that create worse symptoms later to profit off of humans, not just once, but 3 to 5 times. Exactly. Tim Hefner, you're saying, might this be a big reason prescription drugs cost so much? That is one of the big reasons. Actually, one of the reasons why prescription drugs in the United States cost as much as they do, because, look, I'm from San Diego originally, and a lot of people I know will drive to Mexico to buy their prescription drugs, and the U.S. government tries to restrict that process. Look, you can do fentanyl on the street. You can go and buy all marijuana laced with who knows what and smoke it in front of the local school in New York. But you can't go to Mexico and buy for example, the medicine you need to treat your, let's say for example you're a diabetic and you have to get insulin, and if you don't get it, you die, right? If you don't get your insulin, you're going to die. And they charge ridiculous amounts for insulin. You're stuck paying huge amounts of money for insulin. I have a cousin who's he has the more severe form of diabetes where he has to do the blood tests all the time. It's terrible for him. He, for example, didn't have Medicare for a long. He didn't have medical care for a long time, and paying for his insulin was a nightmare. If he does not take insulin several times a day, he will die. And he, of course, has to pay into this inflated drug market. There are people who take trips down to Mexico and buy it cheap because you can buy it like over the counter there. And they come back and they just, use it. And it's the same stuff, but it's way cheaper. The reason why we're not like that, the reason why drugs cost so much in the U.S., one of the many reasons that has been explained to me is through federal government intervention within the pricing process of the drug industry. One of the ways it's been explained to me is that a lot of the pharmacies in the U.S. are partly run by a pseudo-government agency. And it's actually a for-profit business run through a pseudo-government agency. In other words, they can actually make a profit off it. It's a for-profit business run through the government. And what they do is they can negotiate, in addition to that, they can negotiate the pricing. And of course, if you understand that the government is negotiating the pricing, under the fake narrative, I would say, of saying, we need to make sure drugs are affordable. No, you're not. You're making it way more expensive than it actually is. And part of the regulatory system and the threats of lawsuits and everything else also inflate the prices in the U.S. The problem of unaffordable health care in America is not because we don't have socialism. The problem of unaffordable health care in America is because of interventionist socialist policies that inflate the prices artificially. If you were to let the markets regulate themselves, we'd have the cheap prices of Mexico. If you let the markets regulate themselves, you wouldn't be paying massive amounts of money. And it is instead the regulations that inflate the costs. Classical Austrian economics, by the way. State interventionism oftentimes causes more problems than it fixes. And unfortunately, when people look at the high prices, they say, capitalism is the enemy. No, it's not. State interventionism, which is socialism, is the enemy, because that is the process that is causing the problem in the first place. They manufacture a problem, and then they say the solution to that problem is to use taxpayer dollars to subsidize the problem. So you entrench it so that they get taxed, they can take the money right out of your paycheck. If you get single-payer healthcare, you don't fix the problem. You institutionalize the problem. They don't fix it. This system is why it's broken, not because they're not getting taxpayer dollars. It's because of state interventionism changing the game, basically. They're changing the numbers. That is the problem. If you want to make people pay into, government health care, you're not repairing that. You're subsidizing that. Which is another one of my issues with this stuff. And it's one of the problems we have with these fake dichotomies and fake arguments. You're told that, if you read most of the media, they'll say you have option A, capitalism, which is the system we have, which we don't, by the way. We have crony capitalism. You can have this, option A, you keep the one you have where you're paying huge amounts of money for a corrupt system. Or 2, you can have socialism, where everything is free, and we take the money from the billionaires and the millionaires, right? That's option 2. No, this is a fake dichotomy. It's a fake argument. There are many other options. And I would say the third option that I'll take is that, no, we get rid of crony capitalism, right? You get rid of the interventionist policies that have ruined the markets. The socialist elements that have crept their way into what appears on the surface to be a free and capitalist system, but it is not, and you're being lied to that it is. This network of corruption is what is screwing things up. And if you want to fix it, don't subsidize it, just fix it. Get rid of that network of subsidized corruption. Fix that and you fix the system. And I'd say that's the option they're not telling you exists. Which, personally for me, I'd say, I'd vote for that, personally, right? All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for being here. Real quick, we have a great documentary. It's called Flatline. It's only on Epoch TV. And Flatline is a documentary we did around hospitals going out of business in America and why they're going out of business. There are some really serious things happening within the medical system in America, and as I believe they cause more problems, they're going to propose more worse solutions. So it's important to become aware of the actual cause of the problems. If you want to cure an illness, find the real cause. Don't treat the symptom, right? It seems like the model they have for a lot of things. Now, you can watch that on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com. I'll show you that in just a sec. But first, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves. And as always, stay informed and stay free.
Their motto is we care. They don't care.
Almost 200 hospitals in America have closed in just the last few years. We're in a crisis here, aren't we?
Without question, we're at a crisis.
I had no idea how big the problems were facing American hospitals when I started this journey.
And it seems kind of hopeless. Nobody's making enough money to to survive.
That if this hospital is gone, there will be a lot of lives lost.
A place that was alive with energy and doctors and nurses and patients and families. All empty now.
At one point, they had tunnels dug through the rooms.
It's become a magnet for criminals.
It's not an easy thing for a community to lose their hospital.
The whole community suffers financially, economically. It's devastating.
Why is it the hospitals in the rural areas are the ones closing their doors so fast?
The answers are complex, I can tell you that.